broke both my arms.
Oh no, how did you do that?
One I was playing Power Rangers, and one I was chasing the bus.
You sound a little fragile. Thank you for sharing.
My name is Ayala Matthias. I'm 17 years old, student at BCC Theater Arts program. I'm 17, but I'm almost 18 in a couple of weeks, so if anyone wants to maintain.
We'll keep that in mind.
I'm 17 years old also, and I'm a second year student at BCC Theater Arts program, and I'm excited to see what we're doing here today.
Hi, my name is Carrington. I am also a second year student at the Barbados Community College Theater Arts program. When it comes to my personal life, and I have to explain it, I kind of forget everything about myself, but I am also excited to see what we have here today.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Kaya Gill, and I am 17. I'm also a second year student at the Barbados Theater Arts program. Well, I don't know. Anyways, and I'm also writing this reading today. Loudly. Hi, my name is Taina. I'm 19 years old, and I'm a French intern at the Barbados Museum in Singapore.
And where are you from, Taina?
I'm from Guadeloupe. Yes, since the Caribbean.
So my name is Fiona. I'm 21 years old, and I am also a French intern in the Barbados Museum. And I am also from Guadeloupe, where we are studying a play for language.
And I am Kay Hall. I am the Education and Community Outreach Officer at the Barbados Museum and Historical Society. And I'm really excited to have you here today. This is Professor Stefan Mans. Would you like to share a little bit about yourself?
Yes, I take my mask off as well. So very good to see you. Welcome everyone. I'm Stefan Mans. I teach at the British University in Birmingham, but I'm not from Britain. Anyone have a guess where I'm from? Judging by my accent. Sorry? Scotland. Okay, that's an interesting one. I said I'm not from Britain, so Scotland is part of Britain. So anyway, you have to look further afield. You've got a clue there.
Germany?
Yeah, very good. Excellent. Yeah. So I'll be working. Very good. Did you want to say anything? No. Oh, no. I'll be working with you a little bit around some of the issues around the First World War. As you all know, it's Armistice Day tomorrow, and there's a lot of interest, not just in Barbados, but around the world. And what I'll do with you when we go through the exhibition is look at other places, how they remember the First World War, what actually happened in the First World War, and this should hopefully give you a bit of a wider sense what actually happened in the British Empire and in other locations globally. So I'm very excited to work with you as well, and hand over to Kay to Michelle to facilitate whatever.
I'm Michelle, as you all already know. I'm the coordinator of the theatre program at the college. I like to believe that I am a pseudo employee of the museum. It's one of my favorite spaces to work, and I think because a lot of my research now at postgraduate level, my MPhil PhD is looking at cultural studies and how we remember. So it's going to be very interesting for me to be involved in this project.
So I'm going to take off my mask a little bit just so I can be heard a little more clearly. Before we go on a tour of the exhibit led by Professor Mans, I'm going to just get a little feel from you of what you know about what we're going to be discussing today. So let's start with very, very easy things. Does anybody here know anything at all about the First World War? Just raise your hand and tell me what you think you know about the First World War. No? Nobody knows anything at all about the First World War? You don't watch... Yes?
I believe it ended in 1917.
Close-ish. Yes, yes. What? Anybody else have anything else to add? So I have a question then. Do we know any famous personalities coming out of that First World War? I mean, who's the first person you think of when you think of World War I? An infamous person, shall we say? Yes, yes. So you do know something. It's just that maybe you don't know that you know. Anyway, I'm not going to belabor the point. Question number 2. Does anybody know anything about how Barbados might have been involved in that First World War? Have any of you heard any stories coming out from maybe your grandparents or from your, that have passed down about what happened, what role Barbados played in that First World War? So we got fresh young minds here this evening. We got a hand over here.
You were in a military camp?
Close. There was a military internment camp here, but it wasn't a military camp, it was a camp for civilians. But we're going to learn a little bit more about that as we go on our exhibition. Although we were out in the West Indies and far removed from the theater of war, people living in Barbados at the time very much considered themselves to be British citizens. So a lot of that, what people in Britain were feeling with regard to the war was very much replicated in local environment. So we were anti-German, and we also contributed to the war effort, but I don't want to spoil what is coming with Professor Mann. So just 1 or 2 more questions to get you thinking while you're doing the exhibition. Can you think of any German last names in Barbados that are still in use today? You think of anybody that you've ever heard of with a German last name? Well, in Barbados or in Guadeloupe? You know anybody in Guadeloupe with a German last name? It's okay if you don't. But there are actually quite a few local names that you don't necessarily expect. So for example, Seal, because I looked it up online before I asked the question, is a German name. And you know that we've got quite a few seals in Barbados, don't we? Right. Yes?
I had a German friend here who used to stay here. Her last name was Alabama.
Okay, that one is not so usual, but I in fact have never heard that one. How about the Hassels? I'm sure that people have come across people with the last name Hassel. Go ahead.
Can I just say, it might not, there are a lot of people with different backgrounds. Spanish, did that sound a bit Spanish, the name?
Probably.
Yeah, so there are a lot of Spanish living in Germany, so she might have been German, but have a Spanish background or different background. Sorry to interrupt.
No. That's how the workshop
Good.
is
Okay.
organized. Everybody to jump in and share what they know. So basically, I want you to think about these things while you're on the tour. What it would have been like if you were a civilian living in Barbados at the time, if you were British, or if you were one of the Germans or Austrians interned at the time. Think about the circumstances of war, the way how people might have felt, either living on the outside but having to put up with these foreign prisoners, or living inside the camp and being trapped and unable to associate with other people, and maybe not having people being too happy to have you there. So without further ado, I'm going to turn over to Professor Manns, and we're all going to head over to the exhibit. Start with a pretty easy question. How did the pictures and the images that you've seen in the exhibition, how did they make you feel? What type of an impact did they have on you? So they're going to go around the room and just randomly pick people. Are you there? Yes, you first.
it's very educational to me because I honestly don't know a lot. I did know. So, yeah.
Charles? What did you
Experiencing that stuff really makes you feel that type of feeling that you feel for them. And also what I said, I connected some information with what I heard and saw.
Did they look like what y'all thought they would look like?
The concentration camps, yeah. But I didn't know there were classes.
What about you? How did it make you feel when you looked at it? How would you feel if you had a German last name in a country that was not Germany during that First World War? Just shout it out for me, the different emotions that you think that you'd be going through.
Scared?
Scared. What else? Only scared? Nothing more complex than fear? Huh?
Like they need to leave where they come,
Like you need to be so unwelcome. What else? Not safe, so unsafe, yes. How do you think you would feel about the people that was making you feel that way? Hmm? They would be like the enemy. Powerless, yes, there would definitely be feelings of powerlessness. Yes, of course.
Frank, if I slap you in your face, and you know that you can't do me nothing, how you think you might feel? And hate would instill what kind of emotional response? You think after I slapped you in your face and then walking away, you would turn to your colleague and say, what a beautiful rascal man.
What about frustration? I'm going to throw a complete scenario just off the top of my head about there. You are somebody with a German last name, so presumably you're German or Austrian or somebody Scandinavian that can be mistaken for a German Austrian. But you maybe have an English wife or girlfriend, children, but English family, and here you are in a country that is not your own. What about those kinds of feelings? How does that make you? Because that's a little more complicated now. Tell me about the feelings there. Your wife, your girlfriend, your children, your parents maybe. Pardon me? You can't, so how do you feel?
I feel a heavy sense of injustice.
A sense of injustice, I like that. You were going to say something else? You have to think some more.
Well, I think like I wouldn't belong there, but like I feel like people would look at me differently.
So you would feel disconnected, like if you don't belong. All quite valid feelings. All right. Do you think, in your estimation, did any of you get the chance to read the kind of things that the internees complained about? Okay. Do you think that their complaints were justified complaints, that they were fair and reasonable complaints? You do. Okay. Let's expand the lens for that one then. How do you think their living conditions compare to general population prisoners at that same time in Barbados? I'm going to give you a minute. Think about who those other prisoners might have been. Think about what they might have looked like. Think about what kind of conditions that they would have had. General population prisoners, the people most likely to be in prison You'll probably see on one of the panels that they were interned at sites where prisoners were already held who would be, for want of a better way of describing them, common criminals. They might have been sequestered in another part of the prison, but in some cases, they were still a part of a prison population in what would have been a general prison. But you got a list of conditions under which they must be kept because they were, to a certain extent, prisoners of war, even though they were non-combatants. And then you have what the common criminal population is experiencing. So, what do you think? Somebody thinks it was pretty much the same? Really? Not in the same conditions, in the same place. Which was a little bit of racism on their part, which you were quite right to notice. But how do you think the conditions of the... All right, does anybody know anything about conditions in the general prison at the turn of what would have been the 20th century? What do you guys know? Okay. So perhaps it was not a fair question then. I will tell you that internees had a certain standard that had to be kept because they were in fact prisoners of war, and you can't treat prisoners of war a certain way. Not that there wouldn't have been the odd case where somebody maybe made an enemy out of a prison guard and got treated badly, but for the most part, their conditions inside the prison would have been significantly better than the common criminal and the general population. For example, you will see from the panels that the black prisoners dug latrines for these interned prisoners, so they were not digging their own toilets. Somebody else was doing that for them. So that's already a difference in living conditions straight off the panels of the exhibition. So even though they were in prison and interned, there was still a difference in their accommodations as opposed to general population and even along racial lines. So we talked about the various levels of classism within the prison. They would have been still fairly high up the food chain. They couldn't leave, but I can assure you that the black prisoners were not putting on theatrical performances or practicing the violin. So think it up, think it up. So I have another question for you. How do you think the conditions of the persons living in the prison camps, the German and Austrian internees, compared to the average Barbadian on the street in 1914? And I'm going to contextualize that for you. The early 1900s would have been a mere 15 years or 20 years before the 1937 riots, and the conditions that led to the 1937 riots. So again, tell me what you think might have been the difference between those two sets of conditions. The free man on the street versus the imprisoned man in the internment camp. Who was getting the better living conditions, do you think?
The intern.
Okay. Why do you think that?
Because, as you said, it was a few years before the 1937 riot. So, just the fact that there was a riot signifies that something was wrong going on at the time. So they had to fight for something better. And as you say, the interns would have been fairly high up on the class scale. So I would assume that the interns had better living conditions.
They were getting regular meals for a start. They couldn't go anywhere, but they were doing well enough, as we saw that they were practicing sports, they were doing music, they were doing drama. They were basically not worried about their subsistence level of living in a way that the average person living in Barbados was at the time. So that's another thing to consider. When you think about these things, when you think through these things, there's always a matter of degrees and balance and being able to observe what is happening from one area to the other. So, we've done that. Okay. What do you think would be the impact of internment on people's mental health over a period of time? Picture yourself, 4 years of war,
Well, as you were saying, some of the people interned were non-combatant. So for me, if I was one of those people and I was interned and I really did like war against anybody, I would feel some sort of injustice because I was just living my regular life and then I basically get my freedom taken away from me.
All right, let's contextualize this in more modern terms. Do you think that these non-combatant internees might still have had a bit of PTSD after? Yeah. Why? But not only that, not just what they see, but what they experience. I mean, okay. All right. Another thing for you to consider. A lot of what we were discussing happened during a war. Right now we're experiencing a pandemic where we have to stay home, we have to isolate. We've got lots of different rules we're not accustomed to. There's a lot of restriction on personal freedoms. Do you think that there are any similarities between what they might have experienced in an internment camp and what we are experiencing now, stuck in our houses, unable to see our family, unable to socialize with our friends, maybe having our economic earning power affected? I see hands raised. Yes, speak, my son.
Yeah, I would say there was some sort of similarity because, as you say, the whole idea of freedom was stripped away from the masses. But I would not say it was the same because for the interns, you were basically seeing other people living a life of freedom. But in society right now, all of us are living under the same circumstances.
But no. There is the vaccinated versus the unvaccinated, and what freedoms you get when you're vaccinated versus the freedoms that you may not get if you choose not to vaccinate. What about that? What about that?
Well, I think the main difference between the two is that back then it was because of something they didn't do, and now it's for your own well-being. Like the main reason for it is to help you, but back then it was just because they wanted to protect themselves more than.
Okay. What about internment camps versus refugee camps? What are the differences there? Because not every refugee camp is a voluntary refugee camp. In some refugee camps, that's where everybody happened to fetch up after they've run away. But in some refugee camps, it's where the government of the host country has sort of dumped everybody conveniently, and they can't leave and they can't go elsewhere either. So in that case, what's the difference between a forced refugee camp in the modern civilized world where you are not even at war and an internment camp during the war? Tell me about that. I haven't heard anything from this table for a while. I'm going to come back to you. What about you guys? What do you guys think about the difference between the refugee camps and the internment camps? Like, there are a number of refugee camps all over the world where they...
But with refugee camps, we nearly took away the other islands because they couldn't go to there because they had to go to there.
But don't forget what I said. Not every refugee camp is somewhere you choose to be. Sometimes it's where the government of the host country put you, and you cannot move around.
But I guess it's really.
I'm going to leave you to think about that. You don't have to have all the answers. What about the women who couldn't be in the internment camp with their husbands or their significant others or their fathers or their brothers or whatever? What happened to them? Because the men inside the internment camp were getting 3 square meals a day, and they couldn't go where they wanted to, but the women weren't in the camp with them. So what was happening to these women who were not in these internment camps? Who were perhaps dependent on these men? for their survival. What about those women?
They probably
And that means that they weren't working, guys. That's
probably have some probably like a hospital.
That's entirely possible. I don't think a lot is known about those women. I believe Professor Mans told me some of them had to go home and leave their husbands behind so that they could go to their families and have their families take care of them. Some of them stayed and sort of starved and scrapped and did what they could to make ends meet. At the end of the war, sometimes the men were transferred to not home or where their wives and girlfriends or whatever were, but to a completely different third site where they continued to be separated. So that was an ongoing idea of separation. I'm sort of giving you ideas because we're going to do an exercise in a few minutes where you sort of have to create a piece to be based on what you've learned today, sort of exploring those things that you've learned. You're going to get to do it together, you're not on your own. So, let's talk a little bit about the impact of the press. We often talk, and that's a common topic even today, the power of the media. How they can sway people's opinions one way or the other. And I'm going to throw a little something into the mix. The press then versus what I call all of the media now, and that includes social media. What is the power of the media to change opinion and to really change the circumstances of people, both inside the camp, outside the camp, maybe change their circumstances so they're no longer inside the camp, or cause people who are outside the camp to be inside the camp. So we're talking again about the power of the media and the power of the public when fueled by the media. By the way, the schools, the Indian schools that we were talking about, I found the name, I went and Googled it when we had our break. It's residential schools, I couldn't remember what they were called. So when you get the chance, you can Google that. I'm basically giving you some things that you can look up and maybe feed into what you're going to be doing later. And Professor Mans talked about transportation. Again, our internees tended to be transported by ship and by boat and so on. But sometimes both civilians and soldiers were transported in quite inhumane ways. So for example, if we go all the way back then to the indigenous people, you have things like the Tale of Trails. Or if you come all the way forward to the Second World War, you have in the Philippines, there was a march, I forget what the march was called, where basically large numbers of American and Filipino soldiers were marched by the Japanese clear across a landmass, and more than half of them died on the way. Because once again, so I'm not saying by any stretch of the imagination that these internees had an easy ride, an easy way, an easy life, because prison is prison no matter how you frame it and what you give people to do while they're in prison. But I like to think that there's a kind of an ongoing discussion where you like to think about the degrees with which people are treated and the ways in which a lot of these things work together. For example, we discussed when we were doing the tour the difference between a concentration camp in the Second World War and an internment camp in the First World War, even though obviously the end was much more horrific in the Second World War, ending with things like the Holocaust. So, and if you want to go all the way back, one of the earliest types of internment would have been on Goree Island. You can look that up when you're doing your exercise, and that is where enslaved persons were held before shipment in the triangular trade across the Atlantic. And again, similar things, similar conditions. You can in fact visit Goree Island today, but I would advise you that if you ever get the opportunity to go, you go with a fair bit of mental fortification, because it is a quite traumatic experience to walk where your ancestors have been imprisoned. Yes? So with that, we're going to sort of break you into groups. I'm going to fix the groups because I want a good mix of people who speak different languages and people who are different genders, because I want different perspectives. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to split Fiona, and yes, Taina, I'm going to split you. So I'm going to let Taina join Ayele, and I apologize, I do not remember your name. I'm very bad with names, it takes me a while. So Taina is going to go over there, and Fiona is going to come here. this is group 1, and this is group 2. And what I want you to do for me is think about all the things you've learned and discussed today. And it is now 2:30. So at 3 o'clock, I'm going to give you half an hour because I want you to do it properly. You're going to come back and give me a short dramatic presentation based on a theme that resonated with you today, or something that stuck out with you today, or something that you think is something that we should sort of focus on coming out of what we've learned from this exercise. So see you in half an hour, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with.
Remember, you can go back and view the panels.
You can.
If you want to get any additional information on a particular topic. We are going to be kind of popping in and out of your groups to see what you're working on within the next hour. But the idea is to take the material, the conversations that we've had today. It may not even have been on the panel, but something that came up in our conversation that we think is worth representing now through let's say a dramatic performance, but let's not formalize it so much, but through whatever your presentation looks like. Okay?
And it can take whatever form you want to, but we'll meet back here at 3 for me to see what you come up with. Ladies and gentlemen, it is never going to be perfect, so let's see what you got.
Okay, here we have 2 internees at the intern camp in Australia. Here we have Richard Yeager, and he was a soldier who now suffers of PTSD after escaping the war. Here we have Otto Eberhard. He's a store owner. He was a store owner. And now you will see their evolution at the camp during the 5 years.
Hey, I'm Otto.
Grisha.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I'm okay.
You sure you don't?
Yeah, I'm okay. Okay.
Okay, well, I just want to let you know, like.
I said I'm okay. You understand?
What?
Out there. You see out there
I've been out there. Okay,
the things you do, did it make you do? I had to get away from it. I wasn't proud of it.
Look, sit down. Look, I know that this is hard. I know that pressure gets you. But you have to channel your energy in another way. Look, I write. Do you write? You have to do something. Look, this is a song that I'm working on. It's basically a song about my experience in the war. This is your story too. Come on, look excited. Yeah. Okay, come. Help me sing. Just repeat after me, okay? Say okay. Okay. I left home to join the army. Come on, see what's on left. I left my home for the painting to join the army. The day I left, my mama cried. She thought that I would surely die. I left my wife crying at the door. She knew that I would die at war. See. Don't you feel bad?
Hello.
It has to be going on a little. You just expressed your story.
Alright, I'll bet. There's a better way of, spending my time than, usual.
you first. What do you think?
That was a very musical. I feel like you tried to focus on how you can involve how people who suffer from PTSD from the war channels and express their emotions through creativity, which is nice. He kind of went in that direction, but you'll see.
Very, very nice, very lighthearted.
Yeah, it is interesting thing to show how interns express their feelings being inside their town by singing or doing cultural and artistical stuff.
I don't really have any differing opinions. One thing that kind of threw me off was the spectacle of it. So like, I think for one moment Trey was saying something and then it just dropped and then so the spectacle of it was kind of throwing me off. But I like the message, how they were focusing, as my partner said, how they were focusing on how the people would have coped with their PTSD. So yeah, that's basically just my opinion on it.
Nala?
I would like to say that the backs of your heads are beautiful.
Yes,
I thought this was brilliant. Well, it doesn't need to be a polished product, but the way you pinched some names from the posters, I think, it was good. And then the way you made it into some kind of play, I thought it was brilliant. And the singing, super.
That merging of cultures, you know?
Yes.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
The Negro spiritual and the German internment camp I found most interesting as well.
I wish Germans could sing as beautifully as we are. Seriously. We are jealous. So carry on.
Christian, Michelle, feedback?
Material that is new for you. So it's not like it's something that you've had knowledge about before today. And I think that you have done a credible job in taking this very new material in a short space of time and representing it in a way that shows what it is that spoke to you. So congrats to the three of you.
Yes.
And the backs of your heads.
Yes, I think it is commendable that you put it together in such a short space of time, having now learned the information. So I think that that's a lesson to take moving forward.
Okay. Tell me, each of you, what the experience was like for you.
Well, I would say that, right, so I would say that basically we was trying to go for the idea of what they was doing to cope, because we saw that he was tripping out, and they didn't know what to do. He was freaking out. I kind of like showed how they found outlets because they were bored and they was mentally exhausted and whatnot. So I forget your question.
I was asking you how the experience was for you. How did you enjoy it or not?
Yeah, it was actually very fun. I wish that, not just one of those things, I wish that we had more time to work on and build that, but it was.
How long is the exhibit up for? Until the end of the month.
You have that.
You can come back.
So you all know me, right? We met. Right? No, this is a serious no. Because I am not disagreeing with any of the stuff that you were told. My challenge though is that a lot of good work was happening for the Pink Building to see. Which is why I would say that you do have time, because it would be nice to see that with a little bit more awareness of the audience and a lot of the same stuff that you brought, but with, let's see what you do with more time. I think it's worth putting more time into.
I just want to say on the note of more time, it's up until the end of November. There's no reason why you cannot do your applied theatre project at the end of November. I'm just putting that out there as another possibility for you to consider You have a space where you can actually come and physically be in the space together, interact with that, and present at the end of November in 2 weeks.
My choice is pretty fun. It's been pretty fun. These two guys are great. You're really great. I like kids like you added in the singing. I thought it was pretty neat. It's just that I have mucus in my throat because I had milk this morning. So singing, yeah, that was a problem with me and the singing.
Okay. So the creative element here was Ayeda's idea that everybody else helped develop them. Yeah?
Oh, my idea.
It's your idea, but Ayeda added the singing. Ah, okay. Tayana, tell me about your experience.
For me, it was a bit difficult because I'm not really used to speak among a lot of people, and but they helped me a lot, and then it was really good.
So when y'all are coming back to develop this project, right? And continue to use Tayana so she can get a little more accustomed to the public speaking. It's perfectly fine with me. Okay, so group 2, let's see what.
My name is Emma. I represent a traditional woman from Barbados. My life is all about struggling. Every morning I wake up like at 3 a.m. to sell pepper at the market, and then I have to go back to the house to keep my household clean, to cook for my husband who worked in the distillery till 7 p.m. My life is hard. We struggle to make enough food for breakfast and for our children. While in the camps, interns have time to sing, to play drama, to do sports and all things for free. They have free food. They have a roof where they can sleep safe. While us, Barbadians, we are struggling.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Marie. I was living in England when the war first started for a few years with my husband and my children. And one day, all of a sudden, some men came, took my husband, and then deported me and my children back to Germany. And we were struggling for a few years until we found out that they started to hire a few women for the war, so I might not apply for the job, knowing that while I was gone, they would take care of my children and I would get some, well, not much money, but some while I was gone. And I was in it until the war ended, even though I didn't want to be in the war. I didn't want to have anything with me. I love peace. But then when the war ended, I found a different job and I haven't seen my husband in almost 7 years, so I don't know what happened.
I just went to visit family in Germany from my mother's side, and when I came back to my homeland, I became a prisoner. My name is Nicholas, and I was an intern during World War I. I was a potential spy. I was seen as a saboteur of an enemy alien. My government, they enforced something called the Alien Restriction Act that was put into place on the 5th of August, 1914, right before I came back. I was displaced, I was deported, abused, with so many other people.